Oh, hello again. I'm just playing around with colors and shapes, and what is it that I'm doing here? I have a brush here that I created. It's actually a petal of a rose, of a flower. I think I have it down there somewhere. Yep, there they are. A bunch of pictures that I took long ago, and I figured I'd use perhaps some of that to introduce a new topic we haven't talked about yet in this series of Dog Waffle 8 and Taming the Broomhead, and that is how to work with selections. There's a lot of ways to work selections. Here's a picture of one of those roses, and I'm using one of my favorite image viewer, Earphone View, to zoom in a little bit here. And I'm saying maybe I want to grab this portion here, just this part of the flower, this petal. How do I select that? Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. First of all, let's copy that entire image, Control C, copy that to the clipboard, and then switch over to the program of choice for painting, and that would be Dog Waffle. So now, at this point, I still have the brush from earlier session here that I'd like to get rid of. So first of all I'll clear the image, and I'll stop the preview for now, and then I'll also go and zoom out and make sure that mirroring is disabled. Let's clear that, and then I'll just do a Control V to paste the image that's still in the clipboard, to paste that image into, put it in as a new image, and the old one, the current one, will be lost and we don't need it anymore. Alright, so this is the image, and I do want to stop the preview. There you go. Alright, so what I want to do really is select a portion here, and there's a couple of ways to make selections. Here's, by the way, a replace. I had stored the alpha buffer. That's basically what holds the selection, and when I replace it, put it back in, you see the portion that's selected, you see the marching ants around it. You also see the area that's not selected, but it's slightly colorized differently. It's a little bit darker. So if I do Control D or clear the selection from here, you can see the full green colors, and when I replace the mask there, it's hiding it a little bit, not fully, so you can still see some of it. And that's basically showing it here under the overlay alpha. That's the alpha overlay mode. You can, by the way, switch it so that the part that is selected would appear in pink. That would be one of the settings here, somewhere in the settings. Forget exactly where it is, probably down here somewhere. Yeah, invert alpha highlight color. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use it as is, and I'm going to show you now a couple of different ways that you can select this. Right? How do you make that mask? How do you make that? Well, there's a couple of ways. One of them is to go and essentially, let's see, go and clear the selection. There we go. So we start from that. Well, one of them is you can paint it right on it. Right, so you use a paintbrush. You right-click on this, the paintbrush here, right-click and select something like a paint on alpha. That can be a very hard brush or a soft brush. Let's start with the soft brush, and to zoom in, that would be Shift Control and then the right button to zoom in, and Shift Control and the left button to drag it around. So now when you paint on it, initially you see it come in at the current primary color, and when you let go, it switches over as a post effect into alpha. You can actually see that right here when you go to settings and you see the brush settings. The effects brush here is enabled. The effects tools, or the effects tab, shows it's enabled, and it's in a mode, the modal mode down here, which is alpha. So it will essentially take whatever you've drawn and blast that into the alpha channel, which is where your selection lives. Alright, so that said, we can do a Control Z to undo this, Control D to actually clear the current selection and start painting. Now we don't want to paint out here because that selects on the outside. Let's undo that. Let's paint on the inside here. Alright, so that's one way that we could start, and then if we draw a little bit too far, we can go and draw with the right button. That will remove from the current selection. Alright, and so that's one way to get started, and then we can add to that and gradually get all over the place into that picture that we want to select. Now I'm going to do this very quickly. Obviously in the real world you would want to take some time to do this in a more professional way, more precisely, but whenever you draw outside of it, you use the other button on the mouse to undo, to remove the selection. There you go, and then keep adding to it. All right. Now once we have that border, we can go a little bit faster here and do that. All right, so that's one way to make that selection and gradually get the entire selection going here. All right, so let's finish that. And because the question is then also, well, what do we do once we have that selection? How do we get that into a single image where the inside of that rose petal is colorized and shows fully opaque, whereas the outside of it, the non-selected part, would be fully transparent? All right, so that's something that obviously is the next step. That's why we do this selection in the first place, is to identify a portion of the image we would like to work with and keep, and then maybe we get this out as a masked image with transparent background. So we've done a selection. We can go and store it to get a close look at it. Let's get rid of the old one here. So here we have a stored image. We can actually make this a little bit bigger if you want to see that. But the idea now is to say, well, okay, let's go and get rid of the background here and just keep this selection. Now there's two ways to do that. One is very quickly go to the brush menu and say use the selected as brush. Use selected as brush. That's Control B. So let's use that shortcut, Control B, and that picks it up and it's gone. Well, it's actually now in the custom brush, and you can see it right here in the previews, right? If the previews are enabled, you can see it in the custom brush. You can also enable it here. The preview right there will show you that custom brush in your brush as you're painting, if your current tool is the brush. Now when you're painting, it looks okay, but then when you let go, it switches over to the alpha. It still has that selection mode or that post effects mode, so we didn't do anything to change that. So let's go disable that. Let's go Control D to clear the selection, and now we can paint. And that's basically one of the things you'd like to do with it, right, is to be able to paint with that. I had something like a mirror enabled there too, and so it copied it, it mirrored it all over, and I probably have some sort of a couple of different things I have enabled here. Let's go reset that. And so that was one way to do a selection, right? And if I go and use the custom brush again, let's see, where is it? There. Maybe I'd like to save that. So now one way that you can do that, to save it with the transparent background, and first of all you may want to see that really here on the store and manage from the brush menu. You can see indeed the rose petal, fully opaque, colorized as it is, and then transparent on the background. So the question now is, well, how do I save that? Maybe you want to take that into a 3D program. Maybe what you're tracing is not the outline of a rose petal. Maybe it's a human being there in a casual pose, like a business person standing, maybe a stock photography material, and you'd like to isolate it in order to turn the background transparent. Well, we've done that. But then the next step is to put that into a billboard polygon in a 3D scene to add it maybe to an architectural review or architectural scene. So what you can do is when it's in the brush as a custom brush, you can save it right from there. Right, so that's something that you can do right there, and you can go and save it into a couple of different formats. The default Targa is the one I would always recommend first, and then you can also try BMP, PNG, JPEG, and so on. All right, so now there are other ways to select, and sometimes you'll find those other ways better. Let's go back to the original image, and I don't know if we still have it there. Yep, we can go and replace it again with Control V, put that back in there, and get rid of the preview of the custom brush. And so now how else can we select? If we have this image here that we'd like to select, this part of the image, how can we select it? Another way to do that is with the curve tool, and the technique there involves what we call rotoscoping. It's basically to say, let's go create a mask by tracing it, right? By tracing it with a couple of key points. So we'll say, for instance, let's start right here. Click here, and then click here, and well, that was too close, so we'll need to probably draw it in a slightly different order. There you go, move it around. Next curve point goes here, next point goes here, and as you reach 3 or 4 more points, you start seeing it as a smooth curve, and you can always click away and then move closer to it if you need some points that are close together. And so here we can create a curve with a couple of points. Right, so you basically have a couple of control points for a fairly sophisticated, potentially very sophisticated and long curve that goes all around it. And you know, again, I'm going to make it a little bit faster now than you usually. I would normally take my time here to make this really good and add more points than what I'm doing really here. But for sake of time, I'm going to make it a little bit faster. And it'll just give you an idea of roughly what we're looking for to draw these points along that outline to kind of select a region of interest, so to speak, right? So with that, we will have something that we can throw into a mask. And so the question is, well, how do we turn that curve into a selection mask? All right, so here we go back to the end. And we need to close this, so we can do that. I think one of these tools here right there, make this a closed curve. There you go. All right, so we have a curve. And that curve is something that we could use for many different things. We could fill it, we could draw a current brush along it, we could paint a brush along it, and there's also one, turn this into the alpha channel. So that's one thing you can do right there. And replace it, and bingo. So now you have the selection mask right there. You don't need the curve anymore, you can delete all the points. The mask is there. All right, and then how do we get that into the brush? Again, Control B. Bingo, and we can go and we've got it to paint with. And we didn't have to enable the paint on alpha. All right, so that's another way that we can create fairly sophisticated selections, is by using the curve tool, and have the curve tool basically then use that curve in a way where we render it into the alpha. Render that path into the alpha channel. There's actually other ways too, if it's going along an animation, right? The rotor tools is going to allow you to make that, do some keyframes first of all, so that the path, the curve can change over time. And then you can have that curve turn into alpha frame for frame as you're rendering through it. So that's another great feature there too. But just for single static image, that's really a very easy way to do. Now, so we've done two ways to make selections, and there are plenty of others. You know, obviously we have a magic wand, which you may have seen in other programs. We'll explore that a little bit. There's also a lasso tool, and maybe we'll use that one here for the last one. So basically, if you want to just draw it, you just keep dragging around here. And if you don't have a jittery hand, you know, I tend to drink too much coffee. But if you want to do that, that's a way to start perhaps, and then you just do a little bit of corrective adjustment. And so now here you can do that again by going with the paintbrush, paint on alpha, or you can use the shift key to add and remove from the current selection. Now, one thing I would do is I would perhaps selection and store it so that you have a snapshot of that, just in case you need to go back. If you mess something up, you can clearly just go and replace here, right? So, but for instance, if you forget to click the shift key here, if you just go over here and say let's add that, well, it's actually going to replace it. Everything else is gone, so the only thing is here. So if I instead want to add to that selection or remove it, this part actually needs to be removed, right? What I'll do is I'll use the right button, but I'm going to do it in the shift mode with the shift key down, so that it's not going to change the rest of the selection that's already there. And then that way I can just draw around here with the right button to remove that from the selection. And so it's an additive or a subtractive depending on whether you use the left button or the right button. And so now here I need to do an additive again with the shift key down, and I can go and add to that. Up a little bit more. Maybe it's better to use a tablet for something like that, but we can go and try that. Perhaps the right button here. And that gives us a good idea of how else we can use these tools. This one here, almost done. Let's go, and so this we need to remove the selection. That's the right button with the shift down again. Shift down, and there you go. And one more. Whoops. Doesn't matter, it will take okay here. My mouse is on an uneven surface, so I get all sorts of wiggly effects here. All right, so that gives us another way to draw that selection. Now, sometimes you have something a little bit more sophisticated to trace. Now, this is a very crisp shape here, right? But sometimes you'll find maybe like you're tracing the head of somebody and there's hair, or there are some I don't know, some fuzzy stuff, and it's semi-transparent, and it's difficult to to really trace because it's not fully in or out. And what you might want to do then is perhaps blur it a little bit, work on that selection. For instance, there is some grow alpha, or some blur, Gaussian blur. You can do some adjustments with that so it doesn't do a crisp transition but more of a soft transition. You can also find in the brush here, paint on alpha, there's a blobby, and so the blobby will actually draw something a little bit blobby in shape. And so sometimes that's something that you can use as a starting point. Let's say, for instance, if I draw along the edge here in a blobby mode, and then also actually reduce the opacity of that brush. So let me undo this quick and set the opacity to really low. It's going to take much more to really turn it opaque or transparent to make that selection there. So I can actually do some very fine adjustments with that as well. And again, once you're done, you may want to grab it here, get the alpha, store it as a safe copy, and most importantly to grab the whole brush with the transparent background. So that would be from the brush menu, Control B, and you now have a copy of this in your custom brush. Where is it? Oh, here's the opacity. Sorry, that was the wrong. There you go. I guess this guy I can bring down a little bit to normal and paint with that. And again, I'm in the alpha mode here, so let's go and turn this off. There you go, post effects off, and so now you can paint. So that's the first jump into selections, using them to trace a shape of an image, a portion of the image, so that you can then perhaps export it to a TIFF image or a PNG or something else, 32-bit with the alpha channel, holding that transparency mask, which is something very useful if you also work in 3D or architectural illustrations where you need for instance, some people standing on billboard polygons in front of the architectural design. Alright, we'll have another tutorial, actually a couple of more tutorials on selections like this.